June 22, 1941, dawn of Barbarossa. The sun hadn't yet risen over the endless plains of western Russia when the first German shells screamed across the border. At 3:15 a.m., June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa erupted with a fury that shook the earth. 3 million Axis troops, backed by thousands of tanks and aircraft, tore into the Soviet Union, their blitzkrieg doctrine a sharpened blade slicing through the Red Army's unprepared defenses. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies, their Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Junkers Ju-87 Stukas diving like hawks, shredding Soviet airfields before most pilots could even scramble to their planes. By noon, over 1,200 Soviet aircraft lay in smoking ruins, many destroyed on the ground. The Red Air Force was bleeding out, its pilots dazed, its commanders paralyzed. This was the hour of collapse. The Soviet Union, vast and sprawling, seemed to buckle under the weight of German steel. Entire divisions vanished in days, cities burned. And in the chaos, a new machine, untested, unloved, and underestimated, took to the skies. The Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik, a heavy single-engine ground attack aircraft, was about to face its baptism by fire. Its pilots, many barely trained, climbed into cockpits that smelled of fresh paint and raw steel. Knowing the odds were grim, the Luftwaffe called it the Zementbomber, the cement bomber, a mocking jab at its sluggish speed and armored bulk. They laughed as they aimed their guns. But the IL-2, born in desperation, was about to rewrite the rules of war. The machine forged in defiance. The IL-2 was no beauty. It wasn't meant to be. Designed by Sergei Ilyushin, a stubborn engineer who'd fought Soviet bureaucracy as fiercely as any enemy, the Sturmovik was a beast of purpose. Its airframe was a fortress. A 700-kilogram armored tub encased the pilot, engine, and fuel tanks, built to shrug off small arms fire and even light flak. Its wings carried two 20mm SHVAC cannons and racks for bombs or rockets. Though early models were often underarmed, their payloads limited by rushed production. Powered by a 1,600-horsepower AM-38 engine, it lumbered through the sky at barely 250 miles per hour, a sitting duck for the sleek Bf-109s that danced above it. Yet its mission was clear. Dive low, strike hard, save the infantry below. No IL-2 without courage, the pilots whispered, a mantra born in those first desperate days. Ilyushin himself had envisioned a flying tank, a machine that could endure the hell of the battlefield and deliver destruction with surgical precision. But in June 1941, the IL-2 was a prototype pushed into service too soon. Only a handful existed, scattered across airfields near Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev. Factories in Voronezh and Kuibyshev were still learning to build them, hampered by shortages of steel, guns, and even trained workers. The Soviet Air Command, reeling from purges and mismanagement, could barely organize a defense, let alone coordinate a new aircraft's debut. The Sturmovik was a gamble, and its crews were the dice. Near Brest on the morning of June 22, a young pilot named Ivan Petrov climbed into his IL-2, one of only 249 in service. His orders were vague: support the Fourth Army, pinned down by German Panzers. His gunner, a 19-year-old named Yuri Volkov, manned the rear machine gun, a single 7.62mm Shashkas that felt like a toy against the Luftwaffe's cannons. The sky was already thick with smoke and the drone of German engines. "Stay low, hit hard, get out," Petrov muttered, reciting the only tactic they'd been taught. The IL-2's engine roared, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through the cockpit. They lifted off, frost sparkling on the wings, and dove toward the front. The battlefield below was a nightmare. Soviet T-26 tanks burned like torches, their crews fleeing into wheat fields only to be cut down by German machine guns. Panzer IIIs and IVs rolled forward, their turrets swiveling with mechanical arrogance. Petrov spotted a column of half-tracks and swung low, barely 50 feet above the ground. His cannons barked, spitting shells that kicked up dirt and sparks. A half-track erupted in flames, its crew scattering. "Good hit," Volkov shouted over the intercom. But then the sky lit up with tracer fire. Two Bf-109s, their yellow noses gleaming, dove from above, their 20mm cannons tearing into the IL-2's tail. Sparks danced across the armor, but the Sturmovik held. Petrov yanked the stick, banking hard, his stomach lurching as he hugged the treetops. Volkov fired back, his gun chattering uselessly against the German fighter's speed. Zementbomber, crackled a German voice over the radio, followed by laughter. The Luftwaffe pilots were toying with them, confident in their superiority. Petrov's IL-2 limped back to base, its tail riddled with holes, hydraulic fluid leaking like blood. Volkov was unharmed, but his hands shook as he climbed out. "They think we're a joke," he spat. Petrov said nothing, staring at the battered plane. It had survived. That was enough. For now. The Germans had reason to laugh. The Luftwaffe was a well-oiled machine, its pilots hardened by victories in Poland, France, and the Low Countries. The Bf 109, with its 1,100 horsepower engine and blistering speed, was a predator of the skies, flown by aces like Werner Melders, who'd already claimed dozens of kills. The IL-2, by contrast, was a lumbering beast, its early models lacking the firepower or agility to fight back. Luftwaffe reports from June 1941 dismissed it as clumsy and vulnerable, a relic of Soviet backwardness. "They send tractors to fight wolves," one German pilot wrote in his diary, chuckling at the sight of IL-2s struggling to climb above 10,000 feet. But the Germans underestimated the Soviet spirit and the IL-2's potential. Each mission, each loss, was a lesson. Soviet commanders watched as their airfields burned, their pilots fell, and their lines collapsed. Yet the IL-2s kept flying, their crews driven by a mix of fear, duty, and rage. In Moscow, Sergei Ilyushin pored over field reports, his desk littered with sketches and blueprints. The IL-2's armor was strong, but its guns were weak. Its engine was reliable, but its speed was a death sentence. "We need more," he told his team, his voice steady but urgent. "More armor, more guns, more planes." The factories, already stretched thin, worked through the night, their workers fueled by patriotism and fear of the advancing enemy. Among the pilots was Anna Yegorova, a 23-year-old from a peasant family, one of the few women to fly the IL-2. Trained in a male-dominated air force, she'd faced skepticism and scorn, but earned her wings through sheer grit. On June 24th near Smolensk, she flew her first combat mission, her IL-2 loaded with 4 100-kilogram bombs. The target was a German supply depot, guarded by flak guns and patrolled by FW-190s. "No fear, only focus," she told herself, her hands steady on the controls. Her gunner, Maria Ivanova, scanned the skies, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion of 3 missions in 2 days. The depot came into view, a cluster of trucks and fuel drums nestled in a forest clearing. Yegorova dove, the IL-2's nose dropping as the ground rushed up. Flak bursts rocked the plane, shrapnel pinging off the armor like hail on a tin roof. She released her bombs, watching them tumble into the depot. A fireball erupted, black smoke billowing skyward. "Direct hit," Ivanova called. But a FW-190 was already on their tail, its cannons blazing. Yegorova jinked left, then right, skimming the treetops. The IL-2 groaned under the strain, but its armor held. The German broke off, unwilling to chase her into the flak zone. "We're alive," Yegorova whispered, her heart pounding. "This plane is alive." By the end of July 1941, the Soviet Union was on its knees. The Germans had advanced 400 miles, capturing Minsk, Smolensk, and much of Ukraine. The Red Air Force had lost nearly 4,000 aircraft, its squadrons reduced to skeletons. The IL-2 units were no exception. Of the 249 Sturmoviks operational on June 22nd, fewer than 100 remained. Pilots flew 6, sometimes 8 missions a day, their planes patched with whatever scrap was available. Losses were catastrophic. 1 in 3 crews didn't return. Yet the IL-2's reputation was growing. German tank crews began to fear the low drone of its engine, the shadow of its wings. "It doesn't die," a Panzer IV commander wrote, his words tinged with unease. "You hit it, and it keeps coming." In Moscow, Ilyushin met with Stalin's air commanders, his face lined with exhaustion. The IL-2 was proving itself, but it needed to evolve. The 20mm cannons were too weak to pierce modern German armor. The single rear gun was no match for Luftwaffe fighters, and the production lines were too slow to replace the losses. "We can't win with courage alone," Ilyushin said, slamming his fist on the table. "Give me guns, give me armor, give me time." Stalin, his eyes cold, nodded. The factories would double their output. New weapons, 23mm cannons, rockets, anti-tank bombs, were on the way. The IL-2 would rise again. As the meeting ended, a young engineer lingered, his hands clutching a crumpled report from the front. "They're laughing at us now," he said, his voice low. The Germans think they've won. Ilyushin turned, his eyes burning with a quiet fire. Let them laugh now, he replied. They won't laugh for long. The Sturmovik's story was just beginning. The Soviet Union bled through the summer of 1941. The German blitzkrieg carved deeper, swallowing entire armies and leaving trails of burning villages. By August, the Wehrmacht was closing on Kiev and Leningrad, their panzer divisions rolling like an iron tide. The Red Air Force, a shadow of its former self, scrambled to hold the line. In the midst of this chaos, the IL-2 Sturmovik, battered and mocked, began its transformation. The Zementbomber, as the Luftwaffe sneered, was no longer just a target. It was becoming a weapon, forged in the crucible of desperation and defiance. No IL-2 without courage, the pilots repeated, their voices hoarse but unbroken. The machine and its crews were evolving, faster than the Germans could imagine. In the factories of Voronezh and Kuibyshev, the clatter of machinery never stopped. Workers, some barely teenagers, toiled through air raids, their hands blistered from welding and riveting. Sergei Ilyushin's design team, fueled by reports from the front, worked with a singular obsession: make the Sturmovik deadlier, tougher, faster. The early IL-2s rushed into combat with weak 20mm cannons and no rear defense had been easy prey. Now the factories churned out improved models, their blueprints stained with coffee and sweat. Every plane we build is a life saved, or a life taken, Ilyushin told his team, his eyes fixed on a prototype's reinforced wing. The IL-2's evolution was brutal and swift. The 20mm HVAC cannons, adequate against trucks but useless against Panzer IVs, were replaced with 23mm WWII-23 cannons, capable of punching through 25mm of armor at 400 meters. Engineers added racks for RS-82 rockets, crude but devastating, each one a fiery spear that could crack open a half-track or scatter infantry. The armored tub, already a marvel at 700 kilograms, was thickened around the cockpit and fuel lines, shrugging off 7.92mm machine gun fire like rain. But the most critical change was the addition of a rear gunner. Early IL-2s had flown with only a pilot, leaving their tails vulnerable to Bf-109s. Now, a second crewman manned a 12.7mm Berezin UB machine gun, giving the Sturmovik teeth to bite back. The cost of these upgrades was time. Time the Soviet Union didn't have. Factories worked under blackout conditions, their roofs camouflaged against Luftwaffe bombers. Workers slept in shifts on factory floors, their meals rationed to bread and thin soup. We build for the boys who don't come back, one welder muttered, hammering rivets into an IL-2's fuselage. By late August, production had doubled, with 50 new Sturmoviks rolling out each week. It wasn't enough to replace the losses. Over 150 IL-2s had been shot down since June, but it was a start. Each plane carried the weight of a nation's hope. The pilots, too, were transforming. In July, many had been cadets, thrown into cockpits with barely 20 hours of flight time. By August, those who survived were veterans, their eyes hardened by the sight of burning comrades and shattered wings. Training schools, relocated east to avoid German bombs, churned out new crews at a breakneck pace. Instructors, often IL-2 pilots pulled from the front, taught tactics born in blood. Fly low, always low, one grizzled captain told his students, his face scarred from shrapnel. The trees are your armor, the ground is your shield. Low-altitude flying became the IL-2's signature. Pilots learned to skim the earth at 30 feet, weaving through forests and riverbeds to evade Luftwaffe fighters. It was a suicide dance. Clip a tree, and the mission ended in a fireball. But it worked. Bf-109s built for high-altitude dogfights struggled to follow an IL-2 through the treetops. Flak gunners, aiming at predictable angles, found their shells bursting harmlessly above the darting Sturmoviks. They can't hit what they can't see. Pilot Ivan Petrov told his gunner, Yuri Volkov, as they prepared for another mission near Smolensk. Their IL-2, patched from its June mauling, now carried rockets and a rear gunner. Let's give them something to see. The IL-2's first legends were born in the smoke of August. Near Vitebsk, a squadron of 6 Sturmoviks, led by Captain Alexei Smirnov, was tasked with halting a German panzer column advancing on the city. The odds were grim. 30 Panzer IIIs that, supported by anti-aircraft guns and patrolling FW-190s. Smirnov's orders were simple: stop them, or we lose Vitebsk. At dawn, his squadron roared in at 50 feet, their engines shaking the earth. The Germans, caught off guard, scrambled to man their guns. Smirnov's IL-2 led the charge, its 23mm cannons ripping into a Panzer's turret, sparks flying as the tank shuddered and burned. Rockets streaked from the wings, turning 2 half-tracks into twisted wrecks. "Keep firing, keep moving," Smirnov shouted over the radio, his voice drowned by the roar of engines and gunfire. The rear gunners, new to the IL-2, proved their worth. As a F-190 dove on Smirnov's wingman, the gunner's 12.7mm Berezin roared, stitching the German fighter with bullets. The FW-190 broke off, trailing smoke, and crashed into a field. "First blood," the gunner yelled, his voice crackling with adrenaline. 3 IL-2s were lost to flak, their crews' fates unknown, but the column was decimated. 12 tanks and 20 vehicles destroyed in minutes. Vitebsk held for now. Smirnov, landing with a shredded wing, climbed out and kissed the IL-2's nose. "You ugly beast," he whispered. "You're my beast." Anna Yegorova, the peasant-turned-pilot, was carving her own legend. By August, she'd flown 15 missions, her IL-2 a patchwork of bullet holes and field repairs. Near Kiev, she was assigned to strike a German fuel depot, a target guarded by a nest of 20mm flak guns. Her squadron, reduced to 4 planes, took off at dusk, the sky painted crimson by burning villages. "No hesitation," she told her gunner, Maria Ivanova. "We hit, we run, we live." The IL-2s dove through a storm of flak, shells bursting so close the cockpit shook. Yegorova's bombs struck true, igniting the depot in a fireball that lit the horizon. "Burn, you bastards," Ivanova muttered, her gun blazing at a German fighter that dared to follow. But the mission wasn't clean. A flak shell tore into Yegorova's engine, sending oil spraying across the windshield. The IL-2 staggered, its controls sluggish. "Hold her steady," Ivanova urged, her voice calm despite the chaos. Yegorova nursed the plane back to base, landing on a cratered runway as flames licked the engine. Mechanics swarmed the plane, dousing the fire. Yegorova climbed out, her face smudged with soot, her hands trembling. "She took the hit for us," she said, patting the IL-2's armored flank. Word of her strike spread and her name began to echo among the crews. A woman, a Sturmovik pilot, a hero. The Luftwaffe's laughter was fading. Reports from the front told of convoys ambushed, tanks reduced to scrap by a plane that refused to die. A German intelligence officer near Smolensk wrote, "The IL-2 is no longer a joke. It flies where others cannot, strikes where we are blind." Panzer crews, once fearless, now scanned the skies nervously, their radios crackling with warnings. "Achtung, Sturmoviks." The Bf-109s, still deadly, found their kills, harder won. The IL-2's armor absorbed hits that would shred a Yak-1 or MiG-3. Rear gunners, though often outmatched, forced German pilots to break off early, wary of a lucky shot. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the Luftwaffe's rising star, encountered his first IL-2 in August near Zhytomyr. Flying a U-87 Stuka, he dove on a lone Sturmovik, expecting an easy kill. His 20mm cannons roared, stitching the IL-2's wings and fuselage. But the Soviet plane didn't fall. It banked, its rear guns spitting fire, and limped away, leaving Rudel stunned. "It's a flying fortress," he told his squadron, his voice tinged with grudging respect. "We need bigger guns, or more of them." The Germans began adapting, assigning dedicated fighter escorts to protect their armor. But the IL-2's numbers were growing and its pilots were learning. On August 29th, near Roslavl, the IL-2 claimed its first major victory. A German supply convoy, 50 trucks, 10 tanks, and 200 men, was moving to reinforce the 2nd Panzer Group. A squadron of 8 IL-2s, led by Lieutenant Mikhail Kuznetsov, received the mission: destroy the convoy at all costs. The Sturmovik struck at dawn, catching the Germans in open terrain. Kuznetsov's squadron dove in formation, their 23mm cannons and rockets tearing through the column. Trucks exploded, their fuel igniting in geysers of flame. A Panzer III took a direct hit, its turret blown clean off. "Keep the pressure on," Kuznetsov shouted, his plane shuddering from flak. The rear gunners fired relentlessly, driving off 2 Bf-109s that tried to intervene. In 7 minutes, the convoy was gone. 40 vehicles destroyed, the rest abandoned. Only 2 IL-2s returned, their crews bloodied but alive. Kuznetsov, his face pale, reported to his commander, "We did it. But the cost." The mission was a turning point. Soviet commanders saw the IL-2's potential, not just as a survivor, but as a hammer. The Germans, for the first time, felt the weight of that hammer. A captured Wehrmacht officer, surveying the wreckage, muttered, "What kind of plane does this?" The Sturmovik was no longer a joke. It was a promise of vengeance. The autumn of 1941 brought no respite to the Soviet Union. The German blitzkrieg surged onward, encircling Kiev and threatening Moscow itself. The Red Army fought with desperate fury, but the Luftwaffe still owned the skies, their Bf-109s and FW-190s hunting with predatory precision. Amid the chaos, the IL-2 Sturmovik was carving a new kind of battlefield, one fought not in the clouds but in the shadows of the earth. The Zementbomber, once a punchline, was becoming a specter, its low-flying silhouette a harbinger of destruction. "Flying in the treetops became our armor," pilot Ivan Petrov wrote in his diary, his words smudged with grease and resolve. The IL-2 crews were rewriting the rules of aerial warfare, one suicidal mission at a time. The front was a meat grinder. Soviet airfields, often little more than dirt strips, were under constant attack, forcing mechanics to repair IL-2s under tarps or in forest clearings. Pilots flew with maps taped to their thighs, navigating by rivers and burning villages. The Sturmovik's role was simple but brutal: protect the infantry, destroy the panzers, survive the fighters. Every mission was a gamble against flak, fighters, and the unforgiving terrain below. Yet the IL-2s kept flying, their numbers growing as factories churned out new models with heavier guns and thicker armor. "No IL-2 without courage," the mantra echoed, now a badge of honor among the crews. The Luftwaffe had taken notice. By September, German pilots no longer laughed at the IL-2, they hunted it. Squadrons of Bf-109s patrolled the front, tasked with intercepting the Sturmoviks before they could reach their targets. The IL-2's armor, while formidable, couldn't withstand sustained 20mm cannon fire, and its rear gunners, armed with 12.7mm Berezin guns, were often outmatched by the speed and firepower of German fighters. Near Bryansk, a flight of 4 IL-2s, led by Captain Alexei Smirnov, was ambushed by 6 Bf-109s while attacking a German artillery position. "Bandits at 6 o'clock," Smirnov's gunner shouted, the radio crackling with urgency. The IL-2s dove to 30 feet, skimming a wheat field, their propellers kicking up dust and chaff. The Germans followed, their cannons blazing. One IL-2 took a direct hit, its wings shearing off as it cartwheeled into the ground, a fireball marking its grave. Smirnov banked hard, using a stand of pines as cover, his rear gunner spraying bullets to keep the Bf-109s at bay. "Stay low, damn it," he barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. The IL-2's armor absorbed a storm of bullets, sparks flashing across the cockpit canopy. 2 Bf-109s overshot, unable to match the Sturmovik's treetop dance. Smirnov's squadron reached the target, unloading rockets and 23mm shells into the German guns. The artillery fell silent, but only 2 IL-2s returned, their fuselages riddled with holes. "We're prey," Smirnov told his commander, wiping blood from a grazed arm. "But we're learning to bite." The IL-2's survival hinged on a new tactic: low-altitude warfare. Soviet commanders analyzing mission reports realized the Sturmovik's strength was its ability to hug the ground, where German fighters struggled to follow and flak guns couldn't aim accurately. Training camps east of the Urals drilled pilots in this deadly art. Cadets practiced flying at 20 feet, weaving through mock forests made of poles and canvas. "If you see treetops, you're too high," one instructor growled, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too many crashes. The tactic was as psychological as it was practical. IL-2 pilots learned to embrace the terror of skimming the earth, their planes' shadows racing across fields and rivers. Anna Yegorova mastered this doctrine. On September 12th, near Vyazma, she led a flight of 3 IL-2s against a German supply column. The mission was near suicidal. The target was guarded by a battery of 37mm flak guns and patrolled by FW-190s. Yegorova's squadron approached at dusk, flying so low their propellers clipped grass. "No climbing, no fear," she told her gunner, Maria Ivanova, her voice calm over the intercom. The IL-2s burst from a forest's edge, catching the Germans off guard. Rockets streaked from their wings, obliterating trucks and fuel drums in a chain of explosions. Flak guns opened up, but the IL-2s were too low, too fast. The FW-190 dove in, its cannons chewing into Yegorova's wing. Ivanova's Berezin gun roared back, forcing the German to break off. "He's running!" Ivanova shouted, her voice triumphant. The column was destroyed, and all 3 IL-2s returned, though one landed with a shattered landing gear. Yegorova's success spread like wildfire. "The peasant girl flies like a demon," a fellow pilot said, half in awe, half in envy. Her IL-2, nicknamed Red Star, became a symbol of defiance, its nose painted with a single white star for each mission survived. But survival came at a cost. "Every flight feels like cheating death," she wrote in her diary, her words tinged with exhaustion. "But this plane, it's my shield, my sword, my soul." In Kuibyshev, Sergei Ilyushin's team pushed the IL-2's limits. The 23mm cannons, while effective, struggled against the heavier armor of new German tanks like the Panzer IV Ausfuhrer F. Engineers tested 37mm NS-37 cannons, massive weapons that turned the IL-2 into a flying artillery piece. The new guns were heavy, reducing the plane's range and agility, but their impact was devastating. A single hit could gut a tank. Factories also introduced PTAB anti-tank bomblets, small but deadly, designed to penetrate armor from above. "We're not just bombing anymore," Ilyushin told his team. "We're hunting." The rear gunner's role was refined too. The 12.7mm Berezin was upgraded with better sights and more ammunition, giving gunners a fighting chance against German fighters. Training emphasized teamwork. Pilots flew to protect their gunners' fields of fire, while gunners learned to anticipate fighter attacks. "You're not 2 men," one instructor told a crew. "You're 1 machine." The bond between pilot and gunner became sacred, forged in the crucible of shared danger. When a gunner died, pilots often refused new partners, flying alone until grief dulled. The Germans felt the IL-2's growing sting. Near Izhev, a panzer column lost 15 tanks in a single day to a squadron of IL-2s, their rockets and bomblets turning steel into slag. Luftwaffe reports grew grim. "The Sturmovik is not invincible, but it is relentless," one officer wrote. "Its armor defies logic." Hans-Ulrich Rudel, now flying a Ju-87 with upgraded cannons, scored 3 IL-2 kills in a week, but noted their resilience. "You hit them, and they keep flying," he wrote, his frustration palpable. "It's like shooting a bear with a slingshot." German commanders began diverting fighters from other fronts to counter the IL-2 threat, stretching their air forces thin. The IL-2's low-altitude tactics baffled German defenses. Flak gunners trained to track high-flying bombers couldn't adjust their aim fast enough. Panzer crews, once confident in open terrain, now sought cover under trees or in ravines, fearing the Sturmovik's shadow. "Achtung! Tiefangriff," low attack, became a dreaded radio call, signaling the IL-2's arrival. A German infantryman near Smolensk described the sound. "A deep, angry drone, like a swarm of iron bees. You hear it, and you pray." On September 28th, the IL-2 faced its toughest test. The Germans launched Operation Typhoon, their drive on Moscow, with massive panzer spearheads breaking through Soviet lines near Vyazma. General Konstantin Rokossovsky, commanding the 16th Army, called for air support to blunt the advance. A squadron of 12 IL-2s, including Petrov and Yegorova, was scrambled, their planes loaded with PTAB bomblets and rockets. The target, a panzer column of 40 tanks and 60 vehicles, supported by heavy flak. "This is it," Petrov told his gunner, Yuri Volkov. "We stop them, or Moscow falls." The IL-2s attacked at dawn, flying through a gauntlet of flak and fighters. Petrov led the first wave, his plane skimming a riverbed to avoid detection. The panzers came into view, their tracks churning the mud. "Now," he shouted, releasing his bomblets. Dozens of small explosions erupted across the column, tanks halting as their armor cracked. Yegorova's flight followed, her rockets slamming into fuel trucks, turning them into fireballs. The rear gunners fired relentlessly, driving off 2 Bf-109s. But the cost was high. 5 IL-2s were lost, one exploding mid-air, another crashing into a field. Petrov's plane took a hit to the engine, but limped back, oil streaming. Yegorova landed with her gunner wounded, blood staining the cockpit. The attack bought Rokossovsky time. The panzer column, reduced by half, stalled, giving Soviet forces a chance to regroup. "Those pilots saved us," Rokossovsky later wrote. "Their planes are tanks with wings." The IL-2's reputation soared, but the crews paid in blood. At the airfield, Petrov and Yegorova stood silently as mechanics covered the wrecks of fallen comrades. "You can kill us," Petrov said, his voice low, staring at the horizon. But not the Sturmovik. The war in the treetops was just beginning. The winter of 1941 loomed over the Soviet Union like a shroud. Operation Typhoon, the German drive on Moscow, ground forward through mud and frost, the Wehrmacht's panzers clawing closer to the capital. The Red Army, battered but unbowed, fought for every inch, their blood mixing with the frozen earth. In the skies, the IL-2 Sturmovik was no longer a curiosity but a force, its low growl a death knell for German armor. The Luftwaffe's laughter had soured into frustration, their reports now tinged with alarm. "The Sturmovik is a plague," a German officer wrote near Yuknov. "It strikes and survives where others fall." The IL-2, once a flying coffin, was becoming a weapon of vengeance, its crews bound by a grim resolve: no IL-2 without courage. The Soviet war machine, stretched to breaking, was adapting. Factories in the Urals worked through blizzards, their output of IL-2s climbing despite relentless German bombing. Pilots and gunners, hardened by months of loss, flew with a precision born of desperation. The Sturmovik's evolution, thicker armor, heavier guns, rear gunners, had doubled its survivability, turning it from a target into a predator. German commanders, once dismissive, now diverted fighters and flak to counter the IL-2's relentless attacks. "They're learning too fast," Hans-Ulrich Rudel noted in his log, his Ju-87 Stuka increasingly outmatched. The battlefield was shifting, and the Sturmovik was its fulcrum. The addition of rear gunners had transformed the IL-2. By October, most Sturmoviks carried a second crewman, armed with a 12.7mm Berezin UB machine gun mounted in a cramped, exposed turret. The gunner's role was brutal. Perched behind the pilot, he faced the full fury of Luftwaffe fighters, his gun the only defense against 20mm cannons and screaming Bf-109s. "You're the eyes in the back of my head," pilot Ivan Petrov told his gunner, Yuri Volkov, before a mission near Kaluga. Volkov, only 20, nodded grimly, his hands calloused from gripping the Berezin's handles. The bond between pilot and gunner was forged in fire. Trust was their armor, survival their only reward. On October 7th, Petrov's squadron of 6 IL-2s was tasked with halting a German panzer advance threatening Soviet lines at Mtsensk. The target, 25 Panzer IVs and a convoy of supply trucks, guarded by 37mm flak guns. The IL-2s roared in at 40 feet, their shadows flickering over frozen fields. Petrov's 23mm cannons and PTAB bomblets tore into the convoy, shredding trucks and disabling 2 tanks. "Keep them off us, Yuri!" Petrov shouted as 3 Bf-109s dove from the clouds. Volkov's gun roared, its tracers arcing into the lead fighter. A lucky hit struck the Bf-109's engine, sending it spiraling into a hillside. "Got him," Volkov yelled, but flak shells rocked the plane, shrapnel punching through the tail. The IL-2 held, its armor deflecting the worst, and Petrov nursed it back to base, landing with one wheel shot off. The mission cost 2 IL-2s, but the panzer advance stalled, saving Mtsensk for another day. Volkov, climbing from the turret, collapsed from exhaustion, his hands bloodied from gripping the gun. "We're alive because of you," Petrov said, clapping his shoulder. The rear gunners were the unsung heroes, their kills uncounted, their losses mourned in silence. By October's end, gunners like Volkov had forced the Luftwaffe to rethink their tactics, wary of the IL-2's sting. Anna Yegorova's legend grew. Now a lieutenant, she flew with a ferocity that stunned her squadron. On October 15th, near Mozhaisk, she led a flight of 4 IL-2s against a German artillery battery pounding Soviet defenses. The mission was a gauntlet, heavy flak, patrolling FW-190s, and a biting wind that frosted her cockpit glass. "No retreat," she told her gunner, Maria Ivanova, her voice steady over the intercom. The IL-2s dove through a storm of tracers, their 23mm cannons and rockets silencing the battery in a blaze of fire and steel. Ivanova's gun kept FW-190 at bay, its pilot breaking off rather than risk her fire. "They're learning to respect us," Ivanova said, her breath visible in the cold. Yegorova's plane took a hit to the wing, a 20mm shell tearing a jagged hole. "Red Star, hold together," she whispered, coaxing the IL-2 through a shuddering turn. She landed on a makeshift strip, her wheels sinking into mud. Mechanics swarmed the plane, patching it under lantern light. Yegorova, her face pale but unyielding, refused rest. "Another mission, another chance," she told her commander, her eyes burning with purpose. Her courage inspired others, her name whispered in barracks and cockpits. "If Anna can fly through hell, so can we," the young pilot said, strapping into his IL-2. The IL-2's impact was undeniable. Near Vyazma, a German panzer division lost 18 tanks in a single day to a wave of Sturmoviks, their P-TAB bomblets raining death from above. Luftwaffe intelligence reports, once mocking, now sounded alarms. "The IL-2 is indestructible," a captured German pilot told his interrogators, his voice hollow. "Its armor laughs at our guns." The Sturmovik's ability to absorb punishment baffled German tacticians. A single IL-2 could take dozens of hits, machine gun rounds, shrapnel, even cannon shells, and still fly, its pilot and gunner fighting to the last. German flak crews doubled their efforts, but the IL-2's low-altitude runs made them nearly untouchable. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the Luftwaffe's tank-killing ace, faced the IL-2's wrath near Tula. Flying his Ju-87, he targeted a Soviet supply line but found himself ambushed by a flight of Sturmoviks. Their rockets and cannons tore through his escorts, forcing Rudel to dive for cover. "They fight like madmen," he wrote, his respect grudging but clear. "Their planes are slow, but their will is iron." German commanders began deploying heavier 88mm flak guns, but even these struggled against the IL-2's armor and speed at low altitude. "Achtung, Sturmoviks!" became a cry of dread, echoing across radio channels. In Kuibyshev, Sergei Ilyushin pushed his team beyond exhaustion. The IL-2's success demanded more planes, more weapons, more innovation. Factories now produced over 100 Sturmoviks a month, each one a testament to Soviet resilience. Engineers tested new payloads, 37mm cannons for tank busting, cluster bombs for infantry. The AM-38F engine, an upgrade, boosted speed and reliability, letting pilots push the IL-2 harder. "This plane is our fist," Ilyushin told a factory foreman watching a new IL-2 roll off the line. "Make it hit harder." Workers, many women and children, became the unsung backbone. A 16-year-old girl named Vera welded armor plates through 18-hour shifts, her hands scarred but steady. "Every rivet is a soldier saved," she said, her voice barely audible over the factory's din. Air raids struck often, but the workers refused to stop, dragging machinery into bomb shelters to keep production alive. By October's end, over 600 IL-2s were in service, a number that stunned even Soviet commanders. On October 25th, the IL-2 faced a defining moment. General Rokossovsky's 16th Army, defending the Moshaisk line west of Moscow, was crumbling under a German assault. A massive panzer spearhead, 50 tanks, 80 vehicles, threatened to break through. Rokossovsky radioed for air support. "Give me your flying tanks, or we lose the capital." A squadron of 10 IL-2s, led by Captain Smirnov and including Yegorova and Petrov, launched at dawn, their planes heavy with rockets and 37mm shells. The sky was a slate of gray, snow flurrying around their wings. The IL-2s struck without warning, diving from a low cloud bank at 30 feet. Smirnov's cannons ripped into a Panzer IV, its turret exploding in a shower of sparks. Yegorova's rockets obliterated a fuel convoy, the blast shaking the earth. Petrov's P-TABs rained on a cluster of tanks, disabling 6 in seconds. "Keep the pressure on," Smirnov shouted, his plane weaving through flak bursts. The rear gunners fired relentlessly, driving off a pair of FW-190s. The attack lasted 8 minutes, leaving 20 tanks and 30 vehicles in flames. 4 IL-2s were lost, their crews vanishing into the inferno below. Rokossovsky's line held. "Those Sturmoviks turned the tide," he later wrote, his words etched in gratitude. The Germans, stunned, pulled back to regroup. At the airfield, Smirnov, Petrov, and Yegorova stood among their battered planes, their faces grim but proud. "We're not just surviving anymore," Yegorova said, her voice cutting through the wind. "We're winning." The IL-2 was no longer a coffin, it was a hammer, and the Germans were beginning to fear its swing. By the summer of 1943, the Soviet Union was no longer a nation on its knees. The tide of war had shifted, hardened by the blood of Stalingrad and the resolve of a people fighting for survival. The IL-2 Sturmovik, once mocked as the Zementbomber, had become the backbone of Soviet air power. Its deep-throated roar, a symbol of vengeance. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, was about to erupt on the Russian steppe, and the IL-2 would be its hammer. The skies turned black with Sturmoviks. A Soviet infantryman later recalled, his voice trembling with awe. "They were our shield, our sword, our fury. The Germans, who had laughed in 1941, now faced a machine and its crews that had learned to kill with unmatched precision. The Kursk salient, a bulge in the front line 500 miles south of Moscow, was the stage for a colossal clash. The Germans, launching Operation Citadel, amassed over 2,700 tanks and 800,000 men, aiming to crush Soviet defenses and reclaim the initiative. The Red Army, under generals like Konstantin Rokossovsky, prepared a defense in depth, backed by thousands of guns, mines, and aircraft. The IL-2, now produced in staggering numbers, over 10,000 built by mid-1943, was the linchpin of Soviet air support. Its pilots and gunners, veterans of 2 years of hell, flew with a grim efficiency, their planes armed with 37mm cannons, PTAB anti-tank bomblets, and RS-132 rockets. "No IL-2 without courage," they whispered, the mantra now a battle cry. On July 5, 1943, the German offensive began, panzer divisions surging forward under a dawn sky. The Luftwaffe, though weakened, still fielded deadly Bf-109s and FW-190s, tasked with clearing the air for their tanks. But the IL-2s were ready. Near Prokhorovka, a squadron of 18 Sturmoviks, led by Captain Alexei Smirnov, was scrambled to blunt a German armored thrust. 200 Panzer IVs and Tigers, supported by flak and fighters. "Hit them hard, hit them fast," Smirnov told his pilots, his scarred face unyielding. The IL-2s took off from a dirt strip, their wings glinting in the morning sun, frost melting into rivulets on their armored fuselages. The squadron dove at 50 feet, weaving through a landscape scarred by artillery. Below, Soviet T-34s clashed with German tanks, the air thick with smoke and the scream of shells. Smirnov's IL-2 led the charge, its 37mm cannons barking, each shot a thunderclap that tore through a panzer's turret. PTAB bomblets rained down, small explosions peppering the column, disabling tracks and igniting fuel. "Keep formation," Smirnov shouted over the radio as flak bursts rocked the sky. His gunner, Yuri Volkov, swept his 12.7mm Berezin across a FW-190's path, forcing it to break off. "They're scattering," Volkov called, his voice raw with adrenaline. The attack was devastating. In 10 minutes, the IL-2s destroyed 15 tanks and 30 vehicles, turning the German advance into a smoldering graveyard. But the cost was brutal. 5 Sturmoviks fell to flak, and fighters, their crews lost in fireballs that lit the steppe. Smirnov's plane limped back, its tail shredded, hydraulic fluid pooling on the cockpit floor. "We gave them hell," he said, climbing out, his hands shaking but his eyes fierce. The Germans regrouped, but their momentum was broken. Rokossovsky, watching from his command post, radioed, "The Sturmoviks saved us today. They are my flying tanks." Anna Yegorova, now a senior lieutenant, flew in the heart of the storm. Her IL-2, Red Star, bore the marks of 60 missions, its armor patched but unyielding. On July 7th, she led a flight of 6 Sturmoviks against a German supply depot near Orel, a critical hub for Operation Citadel. The target was heavily defended. 88mm flak guns and a squadron of Bf-109s patrolled overhead. "No fear, only focus," Yegorova told her gunner, Maria Ivanova, as they roared toward the target at treetop level, the steppe blurring beneath them. The IL-2s burst from a ravine, catching the Germans off guard. Yegorova's rockets slammed into fuel drums, igniting a fireball that soared 200 feet. Her 37mm cannons ripped through armored cars, scattering debris across the depot. Flak shells exploded around them, shrapnel hammering the IL-2's armor like a blacksmith's anvil. A Bf-109 dove on Yegorova's wingman, its cannons blazing. Ivanova's gun answered, her tracers stitching the fighter's wing. The German broke off, trailing smoke. "Keep them running," Yegorova shouted, banking hard to avoid a flak burst. Her plane took a hit to the engine, oil sprang across the canopy, but she held course, releasing her PTABs into a cluster of trucks. The depot was obliterated, its supplies reduced to ash. Yegorova landed with her engine coughing, mechanics swarming to save Red Star. "She's a fighter like us," she told Ivanova, her voice steady despite the blood on her sleeve from a shrapnel graze. Yegorova's strike crippled German logistics, forcing a panzer division to halt for lack of fuel. Her name, already a legend, became a rallying cry. "If Anna can do it, we all can," the young gunner said, strapping into his turret. But Yegorova's diary revealed the toll. "I fly for those we've lost. Every bomb is for Stalingrad, for my brother, for home." The Battle of Kursk was the IL-2's crucible. Soviet commanders unleashed storming groups, massed formations of 20 to 30 Sturmoviks, synchronized with artillery barrages and T-34 advances. On July 9th, near Ponyri, a group of 25 IL-2s, including Petrov and Yegorova, attacked a German armored salient of 150 tanks. The sky turned black with their wings, the air vibrating with the thrum of AM-38F engines. Like a swarm of locusts, a German infantryman wrote, his hands trembling as he described the onslaught. The IL-2s dove in waves, their 37mm cannons and rockets tearing through Tigers and Panthers, tanks thought invincible. P-tabs fell like hail, cracking turrets and igniting ammunition. The Germans fought back fiercely. Flak guns filled the sky with shrapnel, and FW-190s pounced, their cannons shredding 3 IL-2s in the first pass. Petrov's gunner, Volkov, downed a fighter with a burst to its cockpit, but their plane took a hit to the wing, fuel leaking in a thin stream. "Stay with me, Yuri," Petrov said, his voice tight as he dove through a storm of tracers. Yegorova's flight targeted a Panzer command post, her bombs obliterating it in a blast that shook the earth. The attack destroyed 40 tanks and halted the German advance, but 7 IL-2s didn't return. At the airfield, Petrov stared at the empty sky, his jaw clenched. "We're bleeding, but they're breaking," he said. German morale cracked. A Panzer commander surveying the wreckage of his unit muttered to his crew, "God help us, they've learned to fly." Luftwaffe reports grew desperate, describing skies filled with roaring steel. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, flying relentless missions in his Ju-87, scored 2 IL-2 kills but was forced to retreat when a Sturmovik's gunner clipped his wing. "They're everywhere," he wrote, his words heavy with exhaustion. "No tank is safe." The IL-2's dominance at Kursk was no accident. Factories now produced over 1,000 Sturmoviks a month, their assembly lines a symphony of steel and sweat. Engineers refined the design, adding self-sealing fuel tanks and improved 37mm cannons with higher muzzle velocity. Training schools churned out pilots and gunners, schooled in the treetop doctrine, their simulators mimicking the chaos of low-altitude runs. "You don't fly the IL-2, you fight with it," an instructor told his cadets, pointing to a scarred Sturmovik on display. Sergei Ilyushin, though rarely at the front, felt the weight of every mission. "Each plane carries a piece of us," he told his team, his voice heavy as he read casualty reports. The IL-2's success came at a cost. Over 1,000 Sturmoviks were lost in 1943 alone, their crews often dying in flames. Yet the factories never faltered, their workers driven by stories of pilots like Yegorova and Smirnov. A young welder, her hands bandaged from burns, said, "I build for the ones who don't come back." By July 12th, the German offensive at Kursk was faltering. The IL-2s, flying thousands of sorties, had destroyed hundreds of tanks, their coordinated strikes with artillery and infantry shattering German formations. At Prokhorovka, the climactic tank battle, Sturmoviks flew in relays, their bombs and cannons turning panzer columns into scrap. Soviet troops, inspired by the IL-2's ferocity, launched counterattacks reclaiming ground lost days earlier. "The Sturmoviks gave us wings," Rokossovsky wrote, his words etched in history. The Germans, stunned, began to retreat. Luftwaffe fighters, stretched thin, couldn't stop the IL-2 swarms. A captured German officer, his uniform torn, told his interrogators, "Your planes, they don't die. They keep coming like a curse." The laughter of 1941 was gone, replaced by dread. The IL-2 had turned the tide, proving that courage and steel could break even the mightiest blitzkrieg. At an airfield near Orel, Smirnov, Yegorova, and Petrov stood among their battered planes, the horizon glowing with the fires of victory. "They thought we were weak," Yegorova said, her voice low but fierce. "Now they know better." The Sturmovik had become a legend, and Kursk was its proving ground. The summer of 1943 marked a turning point in the East. The Soviet victory at Kursk had shattered the myth of German invincibility, and the Red Army, emboldened, began to push west. The IL-2 Sturmovik, now a feared symbol of Soviet resilience, led the charge from the skies. No longer the Zementbomber of German mockery, it was a predator, its wings casting shadows of dread over retreating Wehrmacht columns. "The hunters have become the hunted," a Soviet pilot wrote in his diary, his words scrawled by flickering lantern light. The IL-2's tactics, honed through years of sacrifice, were now perfected, and its pilots, men and women like Anna Yegorova, flew with a vengeance that burned brighter than the steppe sun. Over 15,000 IL-2s had rolled off factory lines by late 1943, each one a testament to Soviet industry and resolve. The Sturmovik's design had reached its peak. 37mm NS-37 cannons for tank busting, RS-132 rockets for saturation strikes, and PTAB bomblets that turned panzer formations into graveyards. Its armor, refined to withstand 20mm cannon fire, made it a flying fortress, while rear gunners, armed with M12.7mm Berezin guns, turned dogfights into deadly duels. The Luftwaffe, battered by losses and dwindling resources, struggled to counter the IL-2's relentless assaults. No IL-2 without courage, the crews chanted, their voices echoing over airfields scarred by war. Soviet air tactics had evolved into a science. Storming groups of 20 to 40 IL-2s, coordinated with artillery and T-34 tanks, struck with surgical precision. Pilots flew in tight formations, diving at 30 feet to evade flak, their gunners sweeping the skies for Luftwaffe fighters. Near Kharkov in August 1943, Captain Alexei Smirnov led a storming group of 24 Sturmoviks against a German Panzer division retreating from Kursk. The target, 60 tanks and 100 vehicles, limping west under heavy guard. "Hit them until they break," Smirnov told his squadron, his voice steady over the radio. The IL-2s roared in at dawn, their engines a deep thrum that shook the earth. The attack was a masterpiece of destruction. Smirnov's 37mm cannons punched through a Tiger tank's armor, its turret erupting in flames. PTAB bomblets rained down, disabling a dozen Panzer IVs in seconds. Rockets streaked from the wings, obliterating trucks and scattering infantry. "Keep the pressure on," Smirnov shouted as flak bursts rocked the formation. His gunner, Yuri Volkov, downed Fu-190 with a burst to its engine, the German fighter crashing into a ravine. "One less wolf," Volkov called, his hands steady on the Berezin. The strike destroyed 25 tanks and 40 vehicles, crippling the German retreat. 3 IL-2s were lost, their crews vanishing in fireballs, but the mission was a triumph. Smirnov, landing with a shattered wing, climbed out and saluted his plane. "You're my brother now," he whispered. Anna Yegorova, now a national icon, flew with a fury that inspired awe. Her IL-2 Red Star bore 80 mission marks, each white star a testament to her survival. In September 1943, near Poltava, she led a flight of 8 Sturmoviks against a German airfield, a bold strike to disrupt Luftwaffe operations. The target was heavily defended, 88mm flak guns and a squadron of Bf-109s. "No hesitation," Yegorova told her gunner, Maria Ivanova, as they dove through a storm of tracers, the horizon glowing with burning villages. The IL-2s struck at treetop level, their 37mm cannons shredding parked Ju-87 Stukas. Yegorova's rockets ignited a fuel depot, the explosion shaking the earth. A Bf-109 pounced, its cannons tearing into her wing. Ivanova's gun answered, her tracers clipping the fighter's tail. "He's running," Ivanova shouted, but flak shells rocked the plane, shrapnel pinging off the armored tub. Yegorova held course, releasing her PTABs into a cluster of aircraft. The airfield was left in ruins, 12 planes destroyed. Her IL-2 limped back, oil streaming from the engine, landing gear jammed. "Red Star, you never fail me," she said, patting the plane's nose as mechanics swarmed. Her courage earned her the Order of the Red Banner, but her diary revealed the cost. "I fly for the dead. Their faces are with me in every cockpit." Yegorova's exploits made her a symbol of Soviet defiance, especially among female pilots. By 1943, dozens of women flew IL-2s, their presence a quiet revolution in a male-dominated war. "We fight as equals," Yegorova told a young female gunner, her words firm but kind. "The Sturmovik doesn't care who you are, only that you fight." Her squadron, nicknamed the Valkyries by their comrades, became a legend, their planes adorned with red stars and personal mottos scrawled in chalk. The Luftwaffe was reeling. The IL-2's dominance forced German commanders to divert fighters from strategic bombing to protect their ground forces. Hans Ulrich Rudel, now a decorated ace, faced the Sturmovik's wrath repeatedly. In October 1943, near Kiev, his Ju-87 squadron was ambushed by a storming group of IL-2s while attacking Soviet positions. The Sturmoviks dove from the clouds, their cannons and rockets tearing through Rudel's formation. "They come like a storm," he wrote, his Stuka barely escaping with a shredded tail. "Their armor defies our guns, their will our fear." Rudel scored an IL-2 kill that day, but it cost him 2 wingmen, their planes downed by rear gunners. German tank crews, once the spearhead of the Blitzkrieg, now lived in fear of the IL-2's shadow. Near Dnipropetrovsk, a panzer division lost 30 tanks in a single day to a wave of Sturmoviks, their PTABs piercing armor from above. "Achtung! Tiefangriff!" Low attack echoed over radios, a cry of panic. A German infantryman, cowering in a ditch, described the IL-2's assault. "The sky roars, the ground shakes, and death comes from nowhere." Luftwaffe intelligence reports grew frantic. "The Sturmovik cannot be stopped by conventional means. It is a machine of madness." The IL-2's success was built on sacrifice and scale. Factories in Kuibyshev and Kazan now produced over 1,500 Sturmoviks a month, their workers driven by stories from the front. A 17-year-old welder, her face smudged with soot, said, "I build for pilots like Yegorova. They carry our hope." Sergei Ilyushin's team refined the IL-2 further, adding self-sealing fuel tanks and improved sights for the 37mm cannons. Training schools, relocated to the Urals, produced pilots and gunners schooled in storming tactics, their simulators mimicking the chaos of low-altitude runs. "You are the Sturmovik's soul," an instructor told his cadets, pointing to a battle-scarred IL-2. "Make it sing." The cost remained brutal. IL-2 crews faced the highest casualty rates in the Red Air Force, with 1 in 4 missions ending in loss. Pilots and gunners, bonded by shared danger, mourned each loss as family. When a gunner died, pilots often carved their names into the IL-2's armor, a silent tribute. "We fly for the fallen," Ivan Petrov said, his voice heavy as he prepared for another mission. His gunner, Yuri Volkov, nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. In January 1944, the IL-2's dominance was cemented at the Cherkasy Pocket, where Soviet forces encircled 60,000 German troops. A squadron of 30 Sturmoviks, led by Smirnov and including Yegorova and Petrov, was tasked with destroying a German relief column, 40 tanks and 80 vehicles, trying to break the encirclement. The IL-2s struck at dusk, their shadows blending with the snow-covered steppe. Smirnov's cannons and rockets obliterated a Panzer V Panther, its wreckage blocking the road. Yegorova's PTABs disabled a dozen vehicles, while Petrov's flight targeted flak guns, silencing them in a storm of fire. "No mercy," Smirnov shouted, his plane weaving through tracer lines. The Luftwaffe fought back, Bf-109s diving on the formation. Volkov's gun downed one, its wreckage cartwheeling into the snow. Yegorova's IL-2 took a hit to the cockpit, shrapnel grazing Ivanova's arm, but she kept firing. "We finished this," Yegorova said, her voice fierce. The attack destroyed 20 tanks and 50 vehicles, crippling the relief effort. 5 IL-2s were lost, their crews' fates unknown. The Cherkasy Pocket held, a crushing blow to German hopes. At the airfield, Smirnov, Yegorova, and Petrov stood among their battered planes, the sky red with the glow of victory. "They hunted us once," Petrov said, his voice low but steady. "Now we hunt them." The IL-2 had turned the tables, and the Germans knew it. The laughter of 1941 was a distant memory, replaced by the grim realization. The Sturmovik was unstoppable. The winter of 1944 saw the Soviet Union on the march. The Red Army, fueled by victories at Kursk and Cherkasy, drove west with relentless fury, reclaiming Ukraine and pushing into Poland. The IL-2 Sturmovik, now the scourge of the Eastern Front, led the aerial assault, its wings a symbol of Soviet vengeance. Over 20,000 IL-2s had been built, their production outpacing losses despite the brutal toll on crews. The Luftwaffe, a shadow of its 1941 glory, could no longer match the Sturmovik's numbers or ferocity. "They come in waves, endless, armored, and unstoppable," Hans-Ulrich Rudel wrote, his words heavy with resignation. The Germans who had once laughed at the Zementbomber now dreaded its roar, a sound that heralded death across the crumbling Reich. The IL-2's tactics were a perfected art, storming groups of 30 to 50 planes diving at treetop level, synchronized with artillery and tank assaults. Armed with 37mm cannons, RS-132 rockets, and PTAB bomblets, they shredded panzer columns and fortifications with surgical precision. Pilots and gunners, bound by the mantra, No IL-2 without courage, flew with a mix of exhaustion and resolve, their planes scarred by countless missions. The Sturmovik was no longer just a machine, it was the embodiment of a nation's will, its armor forged in sacrifice, its guns fueled by rage. In June 1944, Operation Bagration unleashed a Soviet juggernaut, obliterating Germany's Army Group Center in Belarus. The IL-2s were its spearhead, flying thousands of sorties to crush retreating German forces. Near Minsk, Captain Alexei Smirnov led a storming group of 40 Sturmoviks against a panzer division, 80 tanks and 150 vehicles fleeing west. The IL-2s struck at dawn, their engines a deafening chorus over the forest. Smirnov's 37mm cannons tore through a Panther's turret, while his PTABs disabled a dozen trucks in seconds. "No escape," he shouted over the radio, his plane weaving through flak bursts. His gunner, Yuri Volkov, swept his 12.7mm Berezin across a WWII's path, sending it spiraling into a field. "Another one down," Volkov called, his voice raw but triumphant. The attack was relentless. Rockets streaked from the IL-2's wings, turning vehicles into fireballs. The Panzer Division lost 30 tanks and 70 vehicles, its survivors scattering into the woods. 4 Sturmoviks fell to flak, and fighters, their crews lost in the chaos. Smirnov landed with a shattered canopy, blood dripping from a shrapnel wound. "We're breaking their spine," he told his commander, his face pale but defiant. Operation Bagration rolled on, liberating Minsk and crushing 28 German divisions. The IL-2's role was undeniable. "Without the Sturmoviks, we'd still be fighting in the mud," General Rokossovsky wrote, his gratitude etched in official reports. Anna Yegorova's legend grew darker in 1944. On August 22nd, near Vitebsk, she led a flight of 10 IL-2s against a German airfield, targeting a squadron of Ju-88 bombers. Her IL-2 Red Star bore 100 mission marks, a testament to her survival. "For Stalingrad, for my brother," she whispered, her hands steady on the controls. The Sturmoviks dove through a storm of 88mm flak, their cannons and rockets shredding parked aircraft. Yegorova's bombs ignited a fuel depot, the explosion lighting the sky. But a FW-190 pounced, its 20mm cannons tearing into her engine. "Hold on, Maria," she shouted to her gunner, Maria Ivanova, as the IL-2 shuddered. Ivanova's gun kept the fighter at bay, but flak shells found their mark. The IL-2 plummeted, crashing into a forest. Yegorova, badly wounded, dragged Ivanova from the wreckage, only to find her dead. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears mixing with blood. Captured by German troops, Yegorova endured torture and interrogation, her spirit unbroken. "You'll never kill the Sturmovik," she told her captors, her voice defiant. Rescued by Soviet forces in January 1945, she returned a hero, her survival a rallying cry. "Anna lives, so we fight," a young pilot said, painting a red star on his IL-2. The Luftwaffe was crumbling. By 1944, fuel shortages and pilot losses left it a hollow force. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, still flying his Ju-87, faced IL-2s daily, their numbers overwhelming. Near Warsaw in September 1944, his squadron was ambushed by a storming group of 35 Sturmoviks. The IL-2s obliterated a German supply convoy, their cannons and rockets leaving 50 vehicles in flames. Rudel downed one IL-2, but its gunner clipped his Stuka's wing, forcing him to land. "They keep coming. You can't kill them fast enough," he wrote, his frustration bordering on despair. Luftwaffe reports echoed his words. "The IL-2 is a scourge. No defense suffices." German tank crews, once the Blitzkrieg's vanguard, now hid under camouflage nets, their radios crackling with warnings. "Achtung, Sturmoviks." Near Lviv, a panzer division lost 40 tanks in 2 days to IL-2 strikes, their PTABs piercing armor with deadly precision. A German officer, his face ashen, told his men, "The sky is their weapon now. We cannot outrun it." The IL-2's low-altitude runs, skimming rivers and forests, made flak guns nearly useless, while its armor shrugged off all but the heaviest hits. In Kuibyshev and Kazan, IL-2 production hit its peak. 2,000 planes a month, each one a marvel of Soviet grit. Workers, many women, toiled through air raids, their hands scarred from welding armor plates. "Every plane is a piece of us," a 15-year-old riveter said, her voice barely audible over the factory's din. Sergei Ilyushin's team refined the Sturmovik further, adding improved 37mm cannons and reinforced landing gear for rough airstrips. "This is our answer to their laughter," Ilyushin told his engineers, his eyes fixed on a new IL-2 rolling off the line. Training schools produced pilots and gunners at a fevered pace, their simulators mimicking the chaos of treetop runs. "You are the Sturmovik's blood," an instructor told his cadets, pointing to a battle-scarred plane. The cost remained staggering. Over 7,000 IL-2s were lost in 1944, their crews dying in flames or captivity. Pilots like Ivan Petrov carried the names of fallen gunners etched into their cockpits, a silent vow to keep fighting. "We fly for them," Petrov told Volkov, his voice heavy as they prepared for another mission. In January 1945, the Vistula-Oder offensive carried Soviet forces into Poland, the IL-2s paving the way. Near Krakow, Smirnov's squadron of 30 Sturmoviks attacked a German defensive line. 50 tanks, 100 guns, and fortified bunkers. The IL-2s dove through a blizzard, their cannons and rockets blasting trenches and armor. "For our brothers," Smirnov shouted, his bombs carving a path for Soviet tanks. Volkov's gun downed a Bf-109, its wreckage sinking into the snow. The strike destroyed 20 tanks and silenced the guns, allowing the Red Army to advance. 6 IL-2s were lost, their crews' names added to the growing roll of heroes. Yegorova, recovered from captivity, rejoined her squadron, her return a spark of hope. On January 20th, she led a flight against a German convoy near Poznan, her bombs and cannons obliterating 15 vehicles. "This is for Maria," she whispered, her eyes burning as she released her payload. The IL-2's relentless strikes broke German resistance, their wreckage littering the road to Berlin. A German soldier, captured after the attack, muttered, "Your planes, they're demons in steel." By March 1945, the IL-2s roared over East Prussia, their missions a relentless drumbeat of destruction. Near Königsberg, Smirnov and Petrov led a storming group against a German airfield, destroying 20 planes and a fuel depot. The Luftwaffe, reduced to a handful of fighters, could barely respond. "The sky is ours," Petrov said, his IL-2 scarred but unbowed. The Sturmovik's dominance was complete, its crews the vanguard of Soviet vengeance. A German general, surveying the ruins, said, "We laughed at them once, now they bury us." The IL-2's thunder echoed across East Prussia, a harbinger of the Reich's collapse. The pilots, exhausted but unbroken, prepared for their final push. Berlin waited, and the Sturmovik would fly above its ruins. The spring of 1945 saw the Soviet Union's wrath descend on Berlin. The Red Army, an unstoppable tide of steel and fury, surged through Poland and East Prussia, their sights set on the heart of the Third Reich. Above them, the IL-2 Sturmovik roared, its wings a banner of vengeance over a shattered Germany. Over 36,000 IL-2s had been built, more than any combat aircraft in history, each one a testament to Soviet endurance and sacrifice. The Luftwaffe, a ghost of its former might, could no longer challenge the skies. Once mocked as the flying tank, now immortal as the hammer of victory, a Soviet pilot wrote, his words scrawled on a cockpit panel scarred by war. The IL-2, born in desperation, was now the executioner of the Blitzkrieg's dreams. The Sturmovik's crews, hardened by years of loss, flew with a purpose that transcended survival. Their planes, armed with 37mm cannons, RS-132 rockets, and PTAB bomblets, struck with relentless precision, carving paths for Soviet tanks through Berlin's ruins. Pilots and gunners, bound by the mantra, "No IL-2 without courage," carried the weight of a nation's scars. "We fly for the dead, for Stalingrad, for home," Anna Yegorova told her squadron, her voice a blade forged in captivity and fire. The final missions over Berlin would be their requiem and their triumph. In April 1945, the Red Army launched its final offensive, the Battle of Berlin. The IL-2s led the way, their storming groups of 40-60 planes pounding German defenses with devastating force. Near the Silo Heights, Captain Alexei Smirnov commanded a squadron of 50 Sturmoviks tasked with destroying a fortified German line. 100 guns, 60 tanks, and thousands of troops dug into concrete bunkers. The IL-2s struck at dawn, their engines a deep thrum that echoed through the morning fog. "For our brothers," Smirnov shouted, his 37mm cannons ripping through a Panther tank, its wreckage blocking a key road. Rockets streaked from the wings, obliterating flak positions, while PTABs rained on trenches, scattering defenders. Yuri Volkov, Smirnov's gunner, swept his 12.7mm Berezin across a FTU-190's path, the fighter breaking off in a trail of smoke. "They're running," Volkov called, his hands steady despite the flak bursts rocking the plane. The attack destroyed 20 tanks and silenced 30 guns, clearing the way for Soviet infantry. 6 IL-2s fell, their crews lost in fireballs that lit the horizon. Smirnov landed with a shredded wing, his face grim but resolute. "We're close," he told his men, his eyes fixed on Berlin's skyline, glowing with distant fires. "This ends now." Anna Yegorova, her body scarred from captivity but her spirit unbroken, flew with a fury that burned brighter than ever. On April 20th, she led a flight of 12 IL-2s against a German command post outside Berlin, her IL-2 Red Star marked with 120 mission stars. "For Maria, for all of them," she whispered, her bombs inscribed with a single word: vengeance. The Sturmoviks dove through a storm of 88mm flak, their cannons and rockets tearing through bunkers and vehicles. Yegorova's bombs obliterated the command post, killing key officers and disrupting German defenses. Her gunner, a young woman named Ivan Petrova, downed a Bf-109 with a burst to its cockpit. "For you, Anna," Petrova shouted, her voice fierce over the intercom. The IL-2 took a hit to the engine, oil spraying across the canopy. Yegorova nursed it back to base, landing on a cratered runway as mechanics swarmed. "Red Star still flies," she said, her voice steady despite the pain of old wounds. Her strike crippled German coordination, earning her the Hero of the Soviet Union award. "I don't fight for medals," she told a reporter, her eyes distant. "I fight for the ones we lost." Her story, whispered in barracks and factories, became a beacon for the Soviet people, proof that even the broken could rise. The Luftwaffe was a dying force. Fuel shortages grounded most of its planes, and its pilots, often teenagers with minimal training, were no match for the IL-2's veterans. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, still flying his Ju-87, faced the Sturmoviks one last time near Brandenburg on April 25th. His squadron, reduced to 6 planes, was ambushed by a storming group of 30 IL-2s led by Ivan Petrov. The Sturmoviks obliterated a German convoy, their cannons and P-tabs leaving 40 vehicles in flames. Rudel downed 1 IL-2, but Petrov's gunner Yuri Volkov clipped his Stuka's wing, forcing him to crash land. "They are unstoppable," Rudel wrote, his words heavy with defeat. "The sky belongs to them." German troops, cornered in Berlin's ruins, lived in terror of the IL-2's shadow. "Achtung, Sturmoviks" was a death knell, signaling waves of armored planes that struck without mercy. A Wehrmacht officer, hiding in a shattered building, described the onslaught. "The air shakes, the ground burns, and there is no escape." The IL-2s destroyed entire airfields, their rockets reducing hangars to rubble. Near Tempelhof, a single storming group obliterated 15 parked aircraft, ensuring the Luftwaffe could not rise again. In Kuibyshev, the factories never stopped. Over 36,000 IL-2s had been built, each one a monument to Soviet resilience. Workers, their hands scarred from years of labor, wept as they heard of victories in Berlin. "We built their wings," a welder said, her voice breaking as she riveted the final IL-2 of the war. Sergei Ilyushin, now a national hero, walked the factory floor, his eyes heavy with the cost. "Every plane carries a piece of our soul," he told his team, his voice soft but firm. The IL-2's design, perfected through years of war, needed no further changes. It was the hammer that broke the Reich. The crews paid the highest price. Over 11,000 IL-2s were lost in combat, their pilots and gunners dying at rates unmatched in the Red Air Force. "We fly knowing we may not return," Petrov wrote, his diary filled with names of fallen comrades. Yet the survivors fought on, their planes scarred but unbowed, their cockpits etched with tributes to the dead. On May 1, 1945, the IL-2s flew their final missions over Berlin. Smirnov and Petrov led a storming group of 60 Sturmoviks against German positions in the city's center, targeting bunkers and artillery near the Reichstag. The IL-2s dove through smoke and flak, their cannons and bombs blasting through concrete and steel. Some pilots dropped not only bombs but flowers, their cockpits filled with petals gathered from Polish fields. "For my brother," "For Stalingrad," raid messages scrawled on bombs, a final act of remembrance. Petrov's P-tabs destroyed a flak battery, while Smirnov's rocket silenced a machine gun nest. "This is the end," Smirnov shouted, his voice lost in the roar of engines. Yegorova, flying her last mission, targeted a German command bunker near the Brandenburg Gate. Her bombs struck true, collapsing the structure in a cloud of dust. "For all of us," she whispered, releasing a handful of flowers as her IL-2 climbed. The Luftwaffe offered no resistance. Its planes were gone, its pilots dead or fled. The IL-2s ruled the sky, their shadows dancing over Berlin's ruins. On May 2nd, the city fell, the red flag raised over the Reichstag. The IL-2 story ended in triumph, but its cost was etched in blood. Over 36,000 built, over 11,000 lost, and countless lives sacrificed. Its pilots and gunners, the heart of the Sturmovik, had faced the highest casualty rates, yet they never faltered. They laughed at armor that couldn't climb, until it climbed over them, Smirnov said, standing among his squadron as Berlin burned. Yegorova, her face lined with the scars of war, added, "We flew through hell to prove them wrong." The Sturmovik's legacy was more than steel. It was the courage of men and women like Yegorova, Smirnov, and Petrov, who turned mockery into might. It was the workers who built it, the engineers who perfected it, and the nation that carried it. The IL-2, born in desperation, baptized in blood, was crowned in victory. "Courage doesn't dodge bullets, it flies through them," Petrov wrote, his final diary entry a testament to the Sturmovik's soul. As the war ended, the IL-2s flew one last time, their wings glinting over the ruins of the Reich. The laughter of 1941 was silent, replaced by the thunder of Soviet victory. If you respect those who turned mockery into might, subscribe and keep their legacy alive.